This content is from a recent OODA Salon with Jennifer Ewbank. Jennifer is the Deputy Director for Digital Innovation at the Central Intelligence Agency. She goes into topics like her office and her responsibilities, as well as her views on the emerging threat landscape. She specifically discusses things that she thinks business leaders need to be aware of regarding this threat landscape. Additionally, Jennifer gets into some new responsibilities that she and others have at the CIA for working with industry. I believe what she says is something that anybody who wants to work with the CIA should pay attention to. For more information on this and other related topics, please visit us at oodaloop.com. I'll put a link below. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to today's OODA Salon. I'm Bob Gorley, the Chief Technology Officer of OODA LLC. Today in the OODA Salon, Jennifer Ewbank, the Deputy Director of CIA for Digital Innovation. Jennifer, thanks for coming today.
It's my pleasure to be here. Really looking forward to our conversation.
Great. And I want to give folks a feel for your bio and what jumped out at me as I read it, and then I give you a chance to fill in what I may have missed. One, you are a career government professional. You spent time at the State Department where you were in the Foreign Service.
That's right.
And for me, as someone who's been around government for so long, when I hear of the Foreign Service, I think of the professional cadre that really makes diplomacy work. These are the State Department professionals that work overseas to interact with our partners and our adversaries even. So that's the Foreign Service. And I hold that in the highest regard. And I was just wondering, did I say that right? What is the Foreign Service?
No, that's absolutely right. So it is our cadre of diplomats and specialists who deploy around the world and work in our embassies overseas. And we engage with the local governments, and then we engage in various multilateral fora. Think, the United Nations, think regional gatherings to advance U.S. interests and to partner with allies around the globe.
And then something else jumped out of your bio at me, and that is you went to CIA where you worked largely in the Directorate of Operations. And that in itself, when I meet people from the Director of Ops, these are professionals themselves, but the very top tier gets selected for these positions of trust called the Chief of Station that works in an embassy. You did that 4 times.
Yes, that's right.
Can you tell us what is a chief
job in government?
Is that right? What is a Chief of Station?
So our chiefs of station lead CIA teams overseas. We're dual-hatted as also the representative of the Director of National Intelligence. So we have 2 roles. One is to lead a CIA team, often with our engagements with the local government, our partnerships on threats of common interest, think counterterrorism, counterproliferation, these kinds of things, looking to advance U.S. interests overseas, doing so, I guess, like the Foreign Service, but with a very different toolkit, if you will. And then as Director of National, the representative of the Director of National Intelligence, the job is to help, let's say, encourage integration and cooperation across the intelligence community entities that are represented in an embassy overseas, and to ensure that we are focused on things that matter and that we're leveraging each other's capabilities and resources and operating as a team rather than as individual players. Thank you again, Bob, for the introduction, for the opportunity to participate in your OODAcast event. It's really a pleasure for me to spend time with you today. Clearly, I'm not in my office. I'm at home. And it's a great opportunity for me, I hope, to share some of my views, my perspective on this evolving digital landscape and what it means for the intelligence community. We just talked about the intelligence community overseas a moment ago. What it means for the organization I lead at the Central Intelligence Agency and the future of the intelligence business. And I thought I'd start by outlining why we created the Directorate of Digital Innovation and explain what it is. I should back up just a tiny bit more to explain to your audience, your viewers, your partners, that CIA is comprised of 5 directorates. You hear about some of them more than others. Our Directorate of Operations, where I grew up in the organization, is that we just discussed, working around the world to advance US interests and protect our national security. We have our Directorate of Analysis, which provides all source analysis and objective insights to policymakers to help inform decision making. We have our Directorate of Support, which is most amazing support professionals anywhere in the world, doing everything from logistics to medical services to you name it, that keep a large complex organization that's worldwide running smoothly. We have our Directorate of Science and Technology, and that's the directorate that's probably closest to the one I lead, which is the Directorate of Digital Innovation. And if you think of the two, it's perhaps not the perfect way to describe it, but think about technology with a physical manifestation and technology with a digital manifestation. And that's largely where the lines are drawn. So DDI, as we call it, Director of Digital Innovation, is our most recent creation. And it was the first new directorate created in over 50 years in the agency. And you only have to read the papers to see that the cyber forces and other threats we're now confronting in the digital landscape are really formidable. And though it's not something that most people think much about, all these forces are changing the very nature of the intelligence business. They represent, I hope it's apparent to everyone, a real danger to our national and economic security. But sometimes people might seem a little bit surprised. I mean, I don't think we should be surprised. Certainly, you are not, Bob. Probably our participants are not surprised, and certainly the CIA is not surprised by the rise of all of these forces online. 6 years ago, the CIA created this first new directorate in over 50 years. And it was really a move to redesign the intelligence enterprise to meet these emerging threats in the digital domain and to leverage all these new capabilities for operational advantage and analytic insights. Now, I'll take just a slight detour and bring it back. I just want to share, because again, not many people work in this business. But the espionage business, as I see it, is fundamentally all about the art of the possible, right? Success requires a lot of creativity and ingenuity, a fair amount of determination, and all combined with a really healthy dose of optimism. And our officers around the world have to believe that they can achieve what others might think simply impossible. And so the Directorate of Digital Innovation, or DDI, as I mentioned earlier, is our acronym. We're trying to chart the course for CIA's art of the possible in this evolving digital and cyber domain. So coming back to what DDI is, DDI today represents this kind of multidisciplinary, multifaceted fusion of cyber and cyber defense, open source collection, which is really important, data science and artificial intelligence, and enterprise information technology. All of which are increasingly essential for CIA's success in this new world, right? A world of ubiquitous sensing, growing cyber threats, and the exponential increase in data. And so our mission within CIA is to integrate CIA's human, technical, and digital operations at scale to counter our foreign adversaries, as we would say, at the speed of mission. And to make this happen, we have another really important responsibility. We are charged with raising the digital acumen of CIA's workforce as a whole, helping to position the agency for success, we hope, long into the future. And now, this might be DDI's mission, but we do none of this alone. Partnerships, whether within the agency, with other members of the national security community, or with patriots in the private sector, are really critical. And that's one of the reasons I love so much speaking at events like this one. So, thank you again, Bob, for the invitation. Our workforce in DDI is really capable and highly skilled. I would say they're amongst the best in government. They work as integrated, multidisciplinary teams each day, tackling some of our most daunting challenges. And I mean daunting in many different ways, daunting technologically, operationally, and analytically. And this workforce sits at kind of the nexus, if you will, of technological threats and the data explosion. And I see our work becoming only more critical to the agency's success and by extension, our national security each day. So as you mentioned, Bob, I come from a different background in the organization, and it's been both a revelation and a privilege to lead the agency's digital workforce, which again, I find tremendously talented, creative, and dedicated. But when we talk about threats and opportunities in the digital landscape and what they mean for our mission and our national security, I speak as more than, let's say the head of a large government organization in Washington, D.C. As we've just talked about briefly, I have spent most of my own intelligence career running operations overseas. And I've seen firsthand what our adversaries are capable of, as well as the power of integration. Indeed, the increasing necessity of integration for our own success. And I've been there when we have woven together new types of digital expertise with our traditional strengths in science and technology, and all in partnership with our core human intelligence tradecraft, the kinds of stuff that people remember from spy movies, most of which is fiction, but a little bit of it is true. And in the process of all these years overseas, I've certainly been part of victories, both large and small. And like anyone in an extreme career that's all about risk, I've certainly seen my share of setbacks. And so when I speak today about what's happening in the digital landscape, this explosion of data in a highly connected world of ubiquitous sensing, the frankly unrelenting onslaught of cyber threats we face from hostile actors, and how we as a service and a country respond, it's more than just a theoretical or academic discussion. For me, it's intensely personal. And so the mission of the CIA is changing as a result of all of these forces. CIA's mission has never lacked for clarity, and it's evolved and changed, constantly in the many years that we've been an organization, and it's done so in line with changes in the world as a whole. And when the CIA was established back in 1947, our principal rivals were the Soviets, later joined by their surrogates across Eastern Europe. And for decades, we sought to prevent the spread of communism, which threatened the American way of life. And after 9/11, which was already a decade after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we pivoted and we placed greater emphasis on counterterrorism, and rightly so. And I give our organization, the intelligence community, the US military, and lots of patriotic Americans tremendous credit for keeping large-scale international terrorist attacks from our shores all these many years. What's different today, perhaps, is that our mission is more complex than ever. So terrorists continue plotting to attack our interests and those of our allies around the globe. That hasn't changed. We see the rise of these more autocratic regimes around the globe, and we're now in this new great power competition, as people like to say. And in essence, we live in this kind of multipolar world, and at times it's a relatively dangerous world. And some of the most consequential threats we currently face are now in the digital domain. In recent years, we've experienced, just a complete transformation in that environment. And for us, our mission responsibilities become progressively more and more challenging due to the high threat environment that we see out there, at least in the information arena. And just look at last week's Log4Shell vulnerability, right? A few lines of code, and there is pervasive impact all around the globe. And like many of my colleagues in government and industry alike, as we try to navigate this new digital domain, our agency has been grappling with just how to manage, right? How to manage the explosion in both volume and variety of data that's been fueled by this technological change. It's transformed the intelligence business in many of the same ways it's transformed the commercial marketplace and our global economy. So, I don't fool myself. We're not the only business in town. Challenges abound for everyone, of course. But for those of us in the intelligence arena, sometimes the stakes are particularly high. So our longtime strains continue with Russia, and you just need to read the newspaper these last few weeks to see that tensions are very high in the region, even as I speak to you today. And China, of course, has emerged as a significant strategic challenge. And beyond this great power competition, plenty of other state and non-state actors alike are vying for power and influence on the world stage. And all of these forces are leveraging technology in support of their causes and leveraging the digital landscape as their domain. So when I think about our work, when I think about DDI and I think about the CIA and the intelligence community, in the final analysis, at least in my final analysis, our own competitiveness as an intelligence service and a community will depend on how fast Relative to our adversaries, we turn the evolving digital landscape to our own advantage. And so I'll maybe back up a little bit and talk just a bit more, just a little bit more about what that landscape looks like. So anyone who reads the papers knows that foreign states have leveraged their cyber capabilities to steal information, influence foreign populations, and to menace private industry, with physical and digital infrastructure being really favorite targets. And although an increasing number of others are dabbling in cyber, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea remain, I would say, the core antagonists on the global stage. And each is at the controls of pretty well-developed and well-resourced cyber programs that are laser focused, let's say, on US interests at home and abroad. And joining this club of late are criminal ransomware outfits who have monetized hacking and are plotting, frankly, as we speak, every day, all day, to hold US networks hostage at some kind of digital gunpoint, just as they did earlier this year with the Colonial Pipeline and JBS attacks. And now what's little new is that, or what has developed almost below the radar, hackers operating in and from China are becoming really formidable players in the digital underworld, and barely concealing ties to cyber elements of criminal enterprises, some known criminal enterprises. The Chinese government views its competition with the West as a zero-sum equation, where China's rise must come at the expense of America's decline. And at times that has prompted or fueled some pretty bold cyber aggression, saturating US networks with disruptive intrusions designed to undermine our security and our competitiveness. And China's systemic, almost, I would say, industrial scale theft of our personal information and intellectual property is both shameless and unrelenting, and part of a concerted campaign to chip away at America's prosperity and diminish our economic might. And again, I make reference to my previous statement, their conviction that China's rise can only come at our decline. Now, the People's Republic of China presents a prolific and very effective cyber espionage threat, a growing influence threat, and it possesses pretty substantial cyber attack capabilities. China's cyber espionage program is particularly noteworthy or formidable in two regards I would highlight. One is its sheer size, and two, there's this vast contract hacker ecosystem. Now, Beijing also sees cyber as a primary means for conducting political warfare. And it's a loose concept, but it can include virtually any means short of war to achieve national objectives. And one aspect of China's influence campaign that's particularly noteworthy, referring back to this theme of scale, is the tremendously broad array of languages and media used to disseminate Beijing's kind of influence messaging around the globe. And we've seen this in recent years as vast Chinese spam networks have posted videos on YouTube in order to influence audiences both in the US and around the world. And these sorts of foreign influence operations, I think they don't get the attention that they deserve. We think of them as not very effective or not very professional, and certainly the quality of some of the videos has not been fantastic. But these sorts of operations play out pretty regularly, and they do have real and tangible impacts on the US and on our allies around the globe. But even with China's rise in this digital landscape, we can't forget Russia, which remains a really significant cyber threat. It has unleashed increasingly sophisticated espionage, influence, and attack capabilities against the West and some of Moscow's regional rivals. The Russians consider cyber attacks, a pretty acceptable tool for deterring adversaries and prosecuting conflicts, and they view large-scale cyber intrusions, cyber collection, as pretty routine business. And we saw this in the cyber supply chain operation earlier this year against SolarWinds, where Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service executed a cyber espionage campaign against the US by placing malicious code in broadly distributed software products. And this was a pretty powerful demonstration or reminder, as if anyone needed it, of Moscow's capabilities, and proof that public and private organizations in the United States remain clearly in Moscow's crosshairs. But they're not alone. Moscow and Beijing are hardly alone in any of this. Iran's technical expertise and kind of enthusiasm for aggressive cyber operations further jeopardize the integrity of US and allied networks. Particularly worrisome, I would say, is the Iranian track record includes attacks on critical infrastructure, as demonstrated by their multiple cyber attacks last year against Israeli water facilities. And North Korea's cyber program it remains troublesome. North Korean hackers have long posed a threat to the integrity and stability of the international financial system itself. And they've engaged in a variety of illicit activities to include cybercrime to generate revenue for the regime. And speaking of cybercrime, last but certainly not least are cyber criminals motivated by a simple financial gain. Their goal is to compromise our personal and financial data and leverage it on underground black markets. Now, ransomware is just the latest incarnation of this threat, and US consumers and businesses alike remain susceptible to all forms of online fraud and theft. And proving that even criminals are leveraging digital innovation, the recent appearance of ransomware as a service has made ransomware available on a scale simply never seen before. And when we consider the potential impact of aggressive ransomware attacks on, say, critical infrastructure or government networks, well, the potential impact is pretty darn clear. Now, taken as a whole, our national and economic security are put at risk by these threats. But as I said earlier, we're a pretty optimistic bunch. It's not all doom and gloom. Technology, as always, is kind of a two-way street, right? It provides windows of opportunity for our organization and others in the intelligence community to strike back, to turn the tables on our rivals and competitors, and gain the strategic advantage we will need to succeed in the 21st century. And so, but how do you do that, right? How do we do that? Certainly, a central pillar of our strategy to outmaneuver adversaries in the digital sphere must be a wholesale embrace of the power of innovation. And now I get it, it's probably a greatly overused term, but innovate we must. In a rapidly changing digital world, each moment we are standing still, we're actually falling behind. And so in DDI, innovation is more than part of our name. I don't know what I'd say, it's our mantra. Well, let's just say it's the essence of who we strive to be. And adaptation to the shifting intelligence landscape has long been encoded in CIA's organizational DNA. And I made reference to how the CIA has changed its mission focus so many times over the decades. And this adaptability, this flexibility, for us in DDI, it's really foundational to everything we do. In this constantly evolving, I use the term euphemistically, battle space, we simply must embrace risk and experimentation as key to innovation, each an essential step in the process of unlocking new insights. And these are the new insights we're going to need to succeed in this 21st century digital landscape. Now, it's fair to say that the coming decade will bring an unprecedented set of national security challenges. They're going to demand an unprecedented response. And to ensure CIA's readiness for long-term success, we've recently made some kind of minor, but really smart and important adjustments in our top priorities as an organization. And those are China, People's Republic of China, technology, our workforce, and partnerships generally. And we've done this in order to optimize the agency's ability to confront future threats, all while continuing to focus on the really important and enduring challenges that we face, including Russia, Iran, and terrorism. And perhaps, our best guiding principle at a time like this, which is tremendously challenging, almost unprecedented in some ways, our best guiding principle comes from a famous Latin proverb, right? Made famous by the Roman poet Virgil 2000 years ago. Fortune favors the bold. And indeed, if we want to prevail against 21st century foes whose technical mastery is matched only by their malign intent, it's imperative that we develop new cutting edge tradecraft, new platforms, new tools, new technological solutions that provide a decisive operational advantage. And every day we fail to innovate, every day we fail to take chances, fail to challenge ourselves in conventional wisdom, we risk mission failure, or worse, obsolescence. Now, innovation is not just the core of our mission in DDI, it's frankly the lifeblood of American industry. And it's the lifeblood of any organization endeavoring to adapt and triumph in this new digital world. And there's a simple and very well-known example that I think illustrates the point quite well. Think about your old neighborhood Blockbuster video store. Well, at least those of us who are old enough to remember that. The collapse of this one-time empire is a cautionary tale, frankly, for all of us, revealing the fate of any organization that fails to innovate in a hyper-competitive and data-driven digital world. And Blockbuster's story is very well known, so I'm not going to repeat the whole trajectory here, except to highlight one thing, and that is its rapid collapse from the top of its industry to complete irrelevance in the span of just 6 years, all because it failed to innovate as others aggressively leveraged new technology and rapidly expanding digital infrastructure. And in some ways, maybe I'm stretching it just a little bit, but in some ways, the Blockbuster story reflects the crossroads we in the intelligence community have reached today. But it's not a choice between, I don't know, complete and utter Blockbuster style failure or following some proven route already mapped out by others. It's about our willingness to be kind of explorers and experimenters ourselves and to chart out a new course. And think about industry, right? We're government, but we think about industry a lot. We work with industry very closely. For certain teams of designers and engineers at our largest tech companies and entertainment companies, think Netflix, Apple, Disney, Amazon, these teams of engineers aren't just tinkering with their existing platforms and trying to, optimize meeting the needs of their customers today. And nor in the Blockbuster example is modernization the act of upgrading an existing inventory from VHS tapes to DVD. I mean, they did that and they failed. Success in this digital world hinges on the ability to project, to anticipate requirements, and to envision solutions well into the future, to anticipate and gamble on the future as uncertain as it may be. And the same holds true for the art of espionage in a world of dramatically fewer real secrets. And think about social media, online digital news platforms, ubiquitous sensing, commercial data collection on land, at sea, in the air, and frankly, the very internet itself, which provides the backbone for so much of it. All of this together means that we no longer lack for at least some insight, even in far-flung corners of the globe. Think the price of fuel in Siberia, or the conditions at a port in East Africa, or the size of a pro-democracy demonstration, well, anywhere on Earth. All pretty much available at our fingertips on our mobile devices. While secrets, real secrets, the plans and intentions of hostile governments and international terrorists, for example, the events that have yet to happen, all of this becomes ever more difficult to uncover by traditional means. So as with any really complex problem, success can be unlocked at least in part through real innovation and effective partnerships. So we in the CIA are not alone in pursuing tomorrow's solutions. And yes, I would argue being first does matter. It always matters. Ask those who led the Manhattan Project, ask NASA, ask Netflix, ask China. Do they aim to be first to lead in the digital world? And the Chinese government has answered that question itself, and has said that it seeks world dominance in the field of artificial intelligence by the year 2030. Now, the Secret Service has a saying about schedules, and I think everyone's heard this one, but if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. And if you're late, well, just don't even bother coming in. So similarly, the United States, and I mean United States, whether we're talking about government or industry, we can't simply aim to catch up to the Chinese, the Russians, the hackers, the cyber criminals, and everyone else who might present some challenge to us. Because the moment we've caught up in this ever developing digital landscape, we are already behind. And the race for decisive advantage in the digital realm is not about keeping pace with our competitors. It is about outpacing them and beating them to the finish line. Again, real innovation and effective partnerships will at least ensure that we can do that. So if I think about the future and what's next, what does that look like? You know, safeguarding the national and economic security of the United States, I hope I can say it's paramount to all of us, right? But we can't do it on our own. And that's why the CIA places such value on smart partnerships with fellow patriotic innovators in the private sector. These partnerships promote greater exchanges of information and more efficient use of resources, and they bring broader range of expertise to problem solving. And while our specific equities occasionally differ, I mean, I get that there are business priorities and there's national security priority. We can each say without hesitation that we're on the same team. We all want to see the United States succeed and flourish and remain a global leader, and do so while still reflecting the Western democratic ideals we all hold so dear. Now, the private sector has always been America's engine for innovation and change, and is one of our single greatest strengths as a nation. And certainly government can and must be a partner in innovation. But in the 21st century, technological innovation is mostly emerging from the private sector. Look no further than the artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies that are enabling us to harness the power of data. More than any other development in this fourth industrial revolution, where the boundaries between the physical and digital worlds are blurring, artificial intelligence holds one of the keys to the future of espionage. It will help us manage this data tsunami at machine speed, and it will free up humans for the higher order cognitive functions, the sense making, if you will, only possible with a biological rather than a digital brain. Now, in the artificial intelligence arena, and unlike previous technologies and previous eras, we, the intelligence community, must now become fast followers rather than primary creators of leading edge technologies. And that's just one reason why deep and sustainable partnerships with private industry and academia are so very vital. They allow both sides to best serve America's interests while adapting to these constantly changing waves of new technologies. And so you might reasonably wonder what steps DDI has taken to strengthen our collaboration with industry. Now, one major component of our approach to industry partnerships is our creation of what we call innovation hubs, focused on identifying best of breed commercially available solutions, especially in the artificial intelligence and machine learning realm, and then exploring how we can rapidly leverage these solutions to meet our increasingly challenging mission requirements. And at these innovation hubs, we work in an unclassified and collaborative lab space, and we're able to bring new technologies to mission more rapidly, therefore, enable faster investment decisions about digital technologies, and ultimately reduce the time from idea to solution. And as I've said to our own workforce on numerous occasions too numerous to mention, and I'm sure people are tired of hearing it at the office, our goal is to end the government's practice of bringing you yesterday's technology tomorrow. So therefore, an enduring aspect of our mission as CIA's digital workforce is to stay informed of the newest commercial technologies and to position the CIA to be that fast follower with industry. So in 2017, we opened CIA's Silicon Valley Innovation Outpost, which facilitates engagement with companies in the tech sector and leading academics in the heart of Silicon Valley, as you might have gathered from the name. And just last year, at the height of the pandemic, we launched the Northern Virginia Innovation Exchange, which is a space for knowledge sharing and problem solving, where we work side by side with industry partners. Now, despite these advances, these efforts and programs, and I hate to admit this, but we are, despite our best intentions, a large government agency like any other. And so we must address the major impediments that stand in the way of bringing new technology rapidly into the CIA. And this involves everything from how we acquire new technology to how we test and accredit it for use on our sensitive networks. And we are making strides in this area, I'm glad to say. And our engagements with industry across the investment spectrum also have proven very valuable to CIA in other ways. They've helped us gain a better sense of the marketplace, which is important, and they've helped us promote a culture of continuous innovation. And for DDI, the newest directorate at CIA, that's part of our name, and it's really important part of our mission. And through our outreach to companies, we're able to discover new technologies in the marketplace that meet the agency's mission needs today and in the future. And I would suggest it all represents pretty good progress in our first 6 years. But we're far from finished, right? Innovation is a process. It's not an event. And despite what I just said a moment ago, there technically is no finish line to cross, because the end of any innovation journey, as people say, signifies the beginning of a new uncharted course. And therefore in DDI, we value in our officers sort of an entrepreneurial spirit. It's our foundation for the future. And it's a future that the DDI, as a transformative element of CIA in the digital age, eagerly embraces. So Bob, I'll finish up where I began. The challenges ahead are truly formidable. But with a whole of nation approach encouraging closer partnerships between government and industry, I remain very optimistic. America can and will defend her values against adversaries who wish us harm. And for DDI, we can do that in part by promoting a culture of continuous innovation and deep, meaningful partnerships with US industry. And that approach will enable us to accelerate the adoption of emerging digital technologies and integrate them effectively with CIA's traditional strengths in human and technical intelligence, all to counter threats to our nation and the shared interests of our allies. So Bob, thank you again for the opportunity to share my thoughts. I'm super enthusiastic about all of this, as you can tell, and I'll leave it there and look forward to a couple questions.
Well, Jennifer, thanks for that. Some things just jump out at me right away as you go through all this stuff. One, that was a great explanation of your office and its responsibilities and its importance to the nation. Another thing that came right through is your optimism. And I think that's important in our line of work here, because if you have anything to do with cybersecurity, you better be optimistic, or else it gets really gloomy and glum first. And so I appreciate your optimism. Another thing I'm very—
one comment there, Bob.
Yeah.
I'll just very quickly. So, in many fields, I imagine cybersecurity is one of them, and the intelligence business is one of them too. The easiest answer to any challenging question is no. And you have to fight the urge. You have to come up with yes and how. And that's really the secret, certainly for our business.
Thanks. Another thing I really appreciate you talking about was your innovation hubs, because now if I see a company that says, I have this great thing, I think it's going to serve CIA missions, I'm going to be able to steer them. All of us should steer them to these innovation hubs, right? And how do we find out where in the right innovation hub? Is this on the CIA website someplace?
It's a good question. So we have an office that we call Digital Futures, and it is responsible for deepening that partnership with industry, for scanning the horizon to find new companies with new technologies that can help us meet our requirements. Breaking into, if I own a company, right, and I've got some great new tech, breaking into the US government kind of acquisitions process is no easy task. It is very complex. It requires a fair amount of study, steps and steps and steps and steps and steps and steps that you've got to navigate. And, it's pretty onerous. And I say that notwithstanding the fact that it's onerous for good reasons, right? It's intended to ensure that the US government are good, that we're good shepherds of the taxpayers' money. And that's important. But, these are processes which developed over, decades in, let's just say, I'm oversimplifying, a hardware world, right? It's a software world now, and the same practices need to change. And so we are working on that, thinking about how we can leverage the unique authorities we have, find new acquisition methodologies that allow us to tap into what's happening in industry more effectively. Digital Futures is our office. We have the 2 innovation hubs, but I want to share one piece of what I think is really fantastic news. So the CIA recently conducted, at Director Burns' instruction, a strategic review where we reviewed 4 major topics that I touched on very briefly in my discussion. So China, technology, our workforce, and partnerships. In that final bin, actually, frankly, in the technology and the final bin, what we recognized was that there needed to be a new approach to working with the private sector in the United States. Certainly since 9/11, there's been broad recognition that, you know, industry brings tremendous power. I mean, industry is the engine of America's democracy, and we need to do a better job of figuring out how to partner, how we respect and account for different equities, right, of our partners in industry, but how we can leverage the best that American industry can offer for our mission. And so we are soon setting up a new mission center, and one of its major missions will be technology and engagement with private sector and academia in America. And so I don't have, let's say, an answer for what number you call to contact the new mission center, but there should be some really, I think, great developments, lots of ideas out there about how we're going to do this, how we create a more intuitive front door for the agency, if you will. And I'm hoping that that'll be one of the first things in the strategy for our new mission center, which will form in January. So
Sounds really exciting.
Watch this space, and I will definitely follow up with you to give you details.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Very exciting. A couple other questions. One I wanted to ask you about is this third wave of internet technologies called the metaverse. And for context, the way many of us look at it is the first wave of the internet was connecting all these computers together and hyperlinks, the web, communication by mostly hardwire. The second wave about 10 years ago was the mobile phone revolution and the video revolution. Lots of mobility connected by the old wires, but also cell and Wi-Fi. And now this third wave that people are calling the metaverse is all of the previous stuff, plus advanced virtual worlds, better, faster connectivity, and an ability to immerse yourself in collaborative environments that are infinitely scalable. So the metaverse really is coming. A lot of us view that it will be $1 trillion market over the next 3, 4, 5 years. If it is this third wave of internet technologies, I'm wondering what your view of this is. There's indications already that both China and Russia are moving into the metaverse and will be using that for advantage. And I'm just wondering what we should be thinking about regarding the threat and ways to mitigate the threat, and if you have any advice for us there.
Wow, so big question. And I have a couple thoughts I would offer. One, so right, I love the way you've characterized this as sort of the fourth wave, right, of internet technologies, internet backbone, and the technologies. And I would say that we are firmly in wave 3.5, which is this kind of the advent of 5G, the rapid proliferation of sensing all around the world, totally ubiquitous. And with that comes some, I won't say the end of, but certainly risks to the very existence of privacy as we know it. And so, these are all things we're grappling with. There's technology, there's philosophy, there's a lot of other issues in that. And the metaverse, we will approach the metaverse as it takes shape in the same way that we approach technological change, massive technological change with strategic impact at any time in our history. I'm looking at it as both threats, what threats might that pose to our national security, and what opportunities might that present to us in our very unique business. And so rather than I don't have a lot of answers, but I would kind of throw out a few questions. These are the kinds of things that we're thinking about. I think industry is going to be thinking about. And I encourage thought leaders like yourself in this space to continue to message. The first, and then you've touched on it, is really security, right? So how secure will this be? Will there be any level of privacy? How will the metaverse, what role will it play in this continuing degradation over time in the very concept of privacy as we've known it? And how will it empower the surveillance society? So we've got you hear a lot about this in the United States. People think that Social media is following them, their phones are following them, and they're kernels of truth and all that. But let's just talk frankly about despotic regimes around the world, excuse me, who are leveraging these technologies to control and monitor their own societies. And you only have to see, the won't put a number on it, but the numbers of their own citizens in prisons and in labor camps as a result of their governments leveraging these new technologies to control and monitor their populations. So what happens if it's the metaverse, right, where you've taken this kind of two-dimensional environment, information environment, and you've exploded it into this kind of totally immersive state. And so I worry about that. I worry about the power that it will give surveillance states, surveillance governments around the world, and in any country, frankly, that lacks privacy protections for its own people. I worry about, other things too. If you think about, I know many people will have read, I keep making references to newspapers. Does anyone read a newspaper anymore except me? But let's just say, digital newspapers pass too. But I worry about the effects of social media, as we've seen in studies, the effects of social media on teenagers in particular, young people whose brains are still not fully formed, and the impacts that particular brands, particular types of social media are having on them, the negative impacts on their mental health, the rise in depression, lots of other issues. And so what happens when you take that environment and you amplify it, right? It's richer, it's in more dimensions, it's more immersive. What does that mean for the mental health of America's youth in particular?
Yeah.
I don't know, but people need to be thinking about this as we're developing the technology. And I think we're at a stage where we cannot or should not simply develop the technology in a vacuum because we can. Okay, there's going to be commercial application. There may be lots of other beneficial applications for society, but we need to be looking really carefully at kind of the ethical framework, the privacy framework, the security framework for sure, and the impact of all of this on our citizens. I think I would add two quick things, and this really wasn't in any order, but how are criminals, right? Criminals and hostile nations going to leverage this? So it's hard. I mean, we can imagine what that might look like, but man, would that simply, just explode the possible vectors for either hostile attacks against the U.S. or certainly collection. Think about ubiquitous collection against, biometrics. We're wearing no haptic vests. If you're whatever you're wearing to do this, that's all data. That's all information that a hostile government can use. And data is, the fuel for artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence algorithms are things that can and are going to be used against the United States. And so we need to think about all of that. And the last thing I'll mention back on security is, I would just, if I had the power today, I would suggest for industry to really, really, really be thinking today about the security aspects, security and privacy, because this whole shift left or shift anywhere in security to ensure that it's baked in from the beginning and not something that we come back after new technology is developed and like we sprinkle it over the top and we think voila, it's secure, right? It needs to be encoded literally and figuratively into the very foundations of these new technologies. So that is not a whole lot of answers, but it's a whole lot of questions.
Right. Well, thanks. It's great questions and great leadership. And with that, I want to turn it over to a couple of our OODA Network members who've asked questions in the chat, and promote a couple up as a panelist so they can ask you live.
All right.
The first one I'm going to promote up, let me see if I can click the right button here. Junaid Islam. And by way of introduction to Junaid, he is a real American patriot. He worked with your agency as a very young man overseas, helping establish networks.
Oh, and fantastic.
He also came back and worked as you guys helped do things like create what would later become the zero trust networking concept.
Oh, yeah.
And Junaid has also worked commercially to establish open protocols for communications. Now he's doing some work with NASA where he's helped them come up with the protocols for how space-based assets communicate, including for this Project Artemis. And I get to work with Junaid on a lot of commercial engagements as we help companies try to become more secure. So
Wow.
with that.
Fantastic. Very nice to meet you.
Great, great. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Oh, great, thank you. So anyway, thank you for your presentation. It was wonderful. My questions are really around a partnership outside of procurement. So you mentioned your Silicon Valley Center. I believe I was one of the first people in it because they actually used me to test your security system. I was kind of like set up, and I did actually present at your first two workshops
That's
on Zero
fantastic. I'm
Trust.
sorry I missed it.
It's pretty boring, but two kind of observations. One, I think the Innovation Center from a procurement perspective is definitely the right thing to do. In fact, if anything, I think, CIA should enlarge it and open it up even more because, getting to know the vendor, it's so powerful because they'll say things in person that it will never be on a website, and it helps both parties. My question is really around, if you look at our threats to national security, a lot of them are actually outside of what CIA would ever procure. You've identified two areas just on this call. One, you mentioned Log4j. I mean, CIA is not a big user of untested open source code, but most of America is. Another thing
but
mentioned.
untested open source code is embedded in virtually, so much, right?
That's right. That's right. And then the other area, there's two other areas. The other is the 5G supply chain, where China has basically infiltrated the supply chain, and the third is social media. So my question to you is, if we take the Innovation Center model, which is around using procurement as a way to create good behavior, there's a vast array of technologies where CIA will never procure anything. I mean, you're not going to, buy a 5G network. How do you envision setting up a positive dynamic with industry when you're not going to be the buyer ever? And in fact, this might bring cost to making, say, 5G secure. So, kind of would love your thoughts on that. And again, thank you for your taking the time to speak with us.
No, it's my pleasure. So, it's a tough question, right? So CIA does have partnerships with industry, with academia, with national laboratories outside the framework of procurement, right? So we buy stuff for sure. We're like any other big government agency, and we buy capabilities, we buy hardware, we buy stuff, right? We buy desks, we buy computer programs. But we do have engagements outside of that framework as well. We have a great deal of outreach to experts in their various fields so that we can better understand an issue. So 5G is a great example, right? So we've got tremendous minds in America thinking about 5G and what the implications are both for national security, for commercial business. Certainly, we learn a lot about the debates between, or at least let's say the tension between an end-to-end Chinese model with access by by the communist government in Beijing versus an open standards model and how that might play to other strengths. And so we do have these engagements with industry, with academics, with national lab experts, both to understand what's happening in the environment. But we also have another responsibility, and that is to help, this is fundamentally what we're created to do, which is to protect our country. And so where we see threats to industry, we have an obligation to make that information known somehow so that American industry can protect itself from fill in the blank. And so we do have those kinds of engagements as well. That becomes a little more challenging at times because we are an intelligence service, right? So we work very closely with partners in the US government, with law enforcement to kind of convey some of that information, to share it in a way that
and since you mentioned that, I do have a quick question, and that has been the declassification of vulnerabilities. In the past, both CIA and NSA have not disclosed vulnerabilities. And this has really hurt American industry where, and you would know this, they've known about things for a long time. And there's been the classic view of not disclosing methods and sources, but I think it has hurt America vastly. I would love your
Yeah.
opinion on speeding up the declassification.
Yeah, that's a fair question, and certainly it's really topical, right? Because we've just seen this wave of computer network exploitation and attacks, particularly over this past year. I'm glad to see I'm not the only person with a dog in the background. So,
Mine just came up too, so.
So no, that's a really fair question, and it is something that we do talk about a fair amount. Certainly the administration is looking very carefully at kind of a holistic cyber strategy. How do we both protect America, but also collect when needed overseas to understand our adversaries' intentions and plans. And there's this really difficult balance in there, but I take your point 100%, and it is something that's really critical for us to explore more kind of in depth and to ask, hard questions about whether vulnerabilities should be exposed immediately to protect.
Again, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Jennifer, one other question I want to promote up as a panelist here. My friend Lewis Shepard. And Lewis, by way of introduction, you may have run into in the Intel community. He's been around for quite a while. After 9/11, he was one of those at Silicon Valley that heard the call to service and joined us at the Defense Intelligence Agency. And, he's the kind of guy that once we pulled him into the Intel community, we could never let him go. And he's been in service ever since with a couple of companies commercially. Right now, he's with VMware. Lewis is also one of these deep thinkers who actually, I believe, reads the newspaper every morning. Correct, Lewis?
2 newspapers, yeah.
Awesome. Nice to meet you, Lewis.
Yeah, likewise. Shall I go ahead, Bob?
Please do.
Please let me interrupt that crazy introduction. Thank you very much. Thanks so much, Jennifer, for your presentation. Fascinating, and for all the work that you do. And thanks, Bob, for putting it on. So yes, I'm a technologist. However, I started life I'm a lapsed political scientist, and I started, like a lot of people, as a Soviet analyst. And my question really is more on a couple of things you touched on. You mentioned the United States government, we're bureaucratic, and I loved your, the challenges that you face in DDI with how you're trying to accelerate something Bob worked hard on as DIA CTO. Accelerate our innovation. The US government has been criticized as heavily bureaucratic since the 50s. And yet from the 50s forward, we fought and won the space race. We fought and won the Cold War. We invented the internet, all with heavy, significant US government and DoD and IC involvement and leadership. So I want to ask really along the spirit of that phenomenal Virgil quote that you say you use as a mantra. I love that. Let me ask, if you were to assess the vulnerabilities of the Chinese and Soviet regimes, and maybe even kind of political cultures, their vulnerability to the same kind of digital offense that, as you well demonstrated, we wind up facing. How would you assess, your directorates and the agencies and the national security establishments? How can we be optimistic about what we're doing on digital offense as well as necessarily defense?
So, tough question to grapple, because it's pretty broad, and I would say a couple things. One, rather than, let's say, assessing kind of China's capabilities in the space, I will just make a couple of observations. One is that, and there are advantages, right? They are advantages that come with being, having a top-down control in society and clear obligations of the citizenry to abide by the rules. And so we are a country founded on principles such as, some version of, as teenagers say, you're not the boss of me, right? And so, and a constitution which fundamentally is about protecting individuals from overreach by the state. And so that's not the case in a place like China or Russia. And so I say advantage, but not in a complimentary way. It's an advantage that there's a top-down expectation of a whole of government, a whole of society commitment to things like achieving AI supremacy by 2030, things like the Made in China 2025 plan, which will strive to have indigenous versions of technology that the Chinese are dependent upon the West for today. And so, that we have to, as I often say to people, if we try to play man to man with China, we lose, right? There's a scale issue. There's a scale issue. We have to play zone. We have to play to our strengths, to our values, and write the rules of the game that we can play. We have tremendous advantages. We have tremendous advantages in technological innovation, in creativity, in that kind of creative thinking. It's the reason that countries all around the world send young engineering students to America, right? That is a huge advantage. We have the advantage of our kind of our values as a society. We have an advantage that China and Russia do not, and that is tremendously close partnerships with governments all around the globe who value and respect that America is a force for good generally on Earth, and they want to be part of that. And so I think if we look at it differently, we think about the strengths that we have, innovation and creativity and technological developments, and partners who can be our voices and support us in international fora, in engagements with other foreign governments. I think we have a lot in our, we have a lot of arrows in our quiver too. And so that's not a very satisfying answer, but I think it's really about playing to our strengths and not playing the game as kind of written, or the rules as written by China. And the last thing I'll say on that note is, and this is kind of, it's a little bit down in the weeds. You don't read much about it in the press, but it's really important as we get into these new types of technology, these new waves of technology, whether it's the metaverse or the constituent technologies that'll make that up. We need to be really cognizant of international standards, right? The norms, the bodies that will govern, standards. Certainly in the 5G world, we're thinking a lot about that. And we want to ensure that those standards are written in a way that will promote, freedom, independence, democracy, sovereignty, all of these things, and will ensure that the United States and close allies all around the world who similarly respect those values are not disadvantaged by the next waves of new technologies, and certainly not with standards that are written by partners that may not have our interests at heart.
Thanks very much.
Jennifer, I hope we haven't busted your schedule. I do have one final question for you,
Sure.
if that's all right.
Yeah.
And, so just noticing the bookshelf behind you, I can tell you're an avid reader.
Oh.
And was wondering if you had any
It's a little messy.
advice
I should
for
have
us.
cleaned it up.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for us? What are you reading these days that we should consider diving into ourselves? So
I have next to my bedside, what I call the stack of shame, the books that stare at me each night when I should be reading. And I do, but I'm reading just finishing up a couple books that I think a lot of your folks, your partners there probably are reading anyways. Very popular at the moment. So one is Christian Brose's Kill Chain. And so that one, I will clarify, that one is I'm listening to and on commutes and long drives. And I, even though it's largely about the defense industry and weapons and platforms and systems, any number of moments throughout that, I'm like hitting the steering wheel saying, yes, right? And there are a lot of really great lessons in there, challenging us to kind of stop thinking about the existing kind of system platforms, think about interoperability, think about how it all works together. And certainly in the digital world, that is key. That is really key. We've got to get all this stuff to work together if we're ever really going to kind of realize the potential of AI and machine learning. We have to be able to get it all to work together. And it also, one of the lessons I've taken away is it really challenges us to think hard about the legacy stuff that we're dragging along with us. And certainly in the digital world, that is an issue too, right? It's kind of ballast. At some point you want to throw it overboard so that you can, kind of fly more freely. So that's one that I'm reading. Another one, and this gets to the earlier question about vulnerabilities, and this was Nicole Perlroth's book on cyber.
This is how they tell me the world ends.
This is how they tell me the world ends, exactly. So raising a lot of really great questions to ponder about, what do we do when vulnerabilities are identified? How do we strike a balance between, leveraging a vulnerability for U.S. national security benefit versus the risks that might pose to industry in America? And I believe firmly, as I've said earlier, industry is the engine of our democracy. We can't look at the two things separately. And so I'm heartened to see that there's a really robust kind of dialogue at the moment amongst policymakers in Washington on this topic. And I think it's really timely. Her book kind of made that accessible to a lot of people by presenting it in kind of, spy thriller style. I think made it really accessible. And I'll add one more if I can.
Yeah.
So those are the ones I'm reading, but I have one of my very favorites that I don't know that it's particularly a bestseller, but one of my favorite books ever. It has nothing to do with cyber and has nothing to do with the kill chain and weapons, but it's a tiny little volume called 7 Brief Lessons on Physics. I don't know if you've read that one. It's Carlo Rovelli, an Italian physicist.
I'll look for that.
Right. So in less than 100 pages, right, he provides the clearest kind of introduction to modern physics ever written, right? And I say this as a liberal arts graduate, right? It's physics described by someone with the heart of a poet, and it leaves you there in stunned silence at moments, just contemplating these huge questions of the universe. And there's a tiny chapter, a couple pages on the idea of loop quantum gravity and trying to bring together these irreconcilable things. You've got the ideas of theory of relativity and then quantum mechanics, and thinking about how it all fits together. And I find myself, and I reread this pretty regularly, I find myself sitting there thinking about, well, how is that? How is, like, the idea that space is a void, it's all false, right? It's pieces of space, it's pieces or quanta or grains of space. Really, really fascinating stuff. So if anyone just wants kind of a mind-blowing book that raises lots of questions and does so in some of the most beautiful and effective language I've ever read, I recommend that one.
Thanks, Jennifer. Really appreciate it. And I also appreciate you taking time today to tell us about your office and your mission and how we can be a part of it. So thanks again.
Well, it's my pleasure. It's something I enjoy talking about, and I appreciate the opportunity to share, our mission and what we're trying to accomplish, and to give a little hint of what I hope will be even more changes to come in terms of our partnerships with industry and really strengthening those.
Right.
So thank you for the opportunity, Bob.
Thank you, Jennifer.